Thank you, Saloni. Good evening, everybody. Good evening, Dr. Tharoor.
Good evening.
You know, when I saw you wondering whether it was this chair or that chair, I was wondering, this gentleman can't have a profile problem. So I was wondering what that was about. But
no, because they probably know which angle they want to capture of you. That's why.
Good one, touche. But, you know, Saloni talked about style and substance. I'm delighted to be able to talk today to Dr. Shashi Tharoor because, you know, in politics today, humor, wit, knowledge, but knowledge communicated deftly with a light touch, all that is missing. And in conversation, that's missing. And it's not just in public conversation, it's not just in political conversation. In our WhatsApp conversations within groups, that's gone, that's missing. We are so polarized and we are so pro and anti, and we're just always willing to pick a fight. Whereas conversation, human interaction should not be a zero-sum game. It shouldn't be that if you win, I lose, and if I win, you lose. I don't know if I got that right. But the point is that this gentleman ensures or symbolizes the fact or the point that there can be civility in discourse, that there can be humor in conversation. And of course, he has a formidable vocabulary, as we all know. So we'll get to learn a word or two if we talk to him. Dr. Tharoor, where do we begin? Because this is about the book that you've just launched. But the book encompasses such a variety of subjects. Where do you want me to start?
Well, you know, it's actually a book about which tries to encapsulate my last 40 years of books. So it really does cover a rather vast range. In fact, when I realized that I published my first book a little more than 40 years ago, I guess I can understand why the publishers thought it might be good to give people a sampling of the range of things I've dealt with. They were very keen on having that mixture of topics and interests that I've dealt with. So there's a bit of politics, a bit of cricket, a bit of fiction, all of that tossed in addition to what people tend to expect of me these days when I've become much more of a non-fiction writer.
But do you think people who know you, and you have this massive following on Twitter, do you think they have the bandwidth for, what, 600 pages? As opposed to how many words on Twitter?
Yeah, I know. No, it's now characters, right? It's 240 characters on Twitter. Whereas here, it's one character, but whom you get to see a rather vast expanse of. You know, I mean, in some ways, it's entirely possible that very few people would be interested in everything that I'm interested in. And therefore, some people may read some things more than other bits. But the advantage of a book like this is you can dip into and out of it. It's not really a book you need to read from cover to cover. So some stuff may interest the average reader, some stuff may interest other readers. I mean, you know, and I think the publisher even thought of this as almost a reference work, as something that people can pop in the bookshelf and look at from time to time.
I'll do one more question directly about the book, and then I'll go into the areas that I'm personally interested in, and feel free to guide me because, you know, it's so wonderful to see people. I'm willing to listen to you. These last couple of years, it's been awful.
Everything was done online, wasn't it?
Oh man, it was awful. So you have this tremendous youth connect. The young people like you, they follow you, you have fun with them.
I like them.
You've been with, you know, you've been on Kunal Kamra's show. If you were to recommend that they, you know, dip in, what would you want them to dip into? Given that you have so many topics from why you're a Hindu to cricket to politics that you've written on.
Well, I'd like them to dip into all, ideally, because obviously I put a lot of myself into everything I write, Anuradha, and this is a book which really tries to tackle a number of important themes. I began as a short story writer in popular Indian magazines. In the days when people actually read stories in magazines, I think those days are also gone now, or are going. And then sort of, in a sense, graduated to more ambitious work. My first book was my PhD thesis rehash, so it didn't really count. It was a book on Indian foreign policy called Reasons of State, and it's been long out of print. There's a short excerpt from it here. But then I wrote the Great Indian Novel, which was an attempt to reimagine the Mahabharata and do it through the prism of the Indian freedom struggle of the 20th century. And that became, and I suppose probably still is, amongst my best known works. And that was fiction, and I followed it up with 2 more books of fiction. So I saw myself principally as a novelist. Then David, who was running Penguin at the time, tried to talk me into a 50th anniversary book for India's, the 50th anniversary of India's independence. And from his persuasion came India from Midnight to the Millennium, which was my first non-fiction work for a general interest audience. It wasn't serious scholarship in history, there are no footnotes, but it told the story of India over 50 years, and it sort of showed me that I could distill vast amounts of information and try and make readable prose out of it. And at the same time, it also showed me that I didn't have to be only a novelist. But I wrote, again, my next book was again a novel, Riot. When I published that in 2001, I would say I still thought of myself principally as a novelist. But in the next 20 years after that, I haven't published a single novel. And it's partially to do with the life I lead. Those days at the UN, later in Indian politics, there have just been too many encroachments on my time and too many pressures on what's available for me to write. And therefore, fiction became more and more of a challenge, because with fiction, you need not just time but a space inside your head, right, to create this alternative universe, to populate it with characters, incidents, dialogue, that means as much to you as what you're encountering in real life. And when real life keeps interrupting that, the illusions you've built up get shattered. And so my laptop is littered with half-begun manuscripts for fiction. Whereas with non-fiction, it's interruptible. I mean, you can write something and be dragged off to Yugoslavia, as I was during the UN, or be dragged off to the constituency, or to campaigning in an election, or whatever it may be, or to have a parliament session that completely eats up your time. And then still you can go back to what you've written, pick up the train of thought or the argument that you were developing, and complete it. And that's why, really, with the 4 of my first 5 books being fiction, I've ended up with everything else since then being non-fiction. And now I'm up to 23, counting this one.
So I would recommend, if you do pick up this book and you want to get into Dr. Tharoor's work, if you're not already familiar, he's got a bunch of short stories in here which are really, really quite wonderful. They're charming, they're heartfelt, and they have great contextual detail. The other thing I would dip into, and this is the non-fiction part of it, is the UN section, because what on earth is happening? We thought that, hey, you know, the world is going to be a saner place. We've had the pandemic, the world shut down, the virus overtook us, and now you have men with guns and weapons, Russia invading Ukraine. Just what is going on?
Yeah, it's really, I mean, it's almost inconceivable that that would happen. Ukraine was not only part of Russia, but a deeply central part of Russian civilization and culture, and now suddenly they're at war with each other. It's really quite bizarre. When you talk about the UN there, I don't know that the UN could have done very much once the war broke out, because the UN is set up to be both a platform or a stage as well as an actor. So on the stage, you've got all these different member states who are the actors talking to each other and arriving at a consensus. And when they agree, the UN can be very effective. And that's when the Secretary General or his peacekeeping forces or his agencies can go out and deliver results. But when you have the UN unable to agree, and remember that at the UN, in the Security Council, which is the body that's responsible for international peace and security, there are 5 permanent members with a veto. And so if any one of them has their interest directly at stake, they'll veto anything they don't like. That's the way the organization was designed. And so the Russians cannot be stopped, even if there's a unanimous vote of the rest against the Russians. And what happened, as you know, was that the Russians predictably vetoed the resolution deploring their action. Now, you therefore can't see the UN getting involved in ending this particular war at this time, but
then what's the point of the UN? I mean, just to go in after it's all over, in the aftermath, and clean things up, and I'm not denying that that's very important, but if you're not able to prevent war and human suffering, which we are seeing play out, then what is the point of this body?
No, but the UN is able to prevent a lot of wars where the permanent members don't have a stake. That's the real situation. So when when the permanent members are not involved in these wars in the periphery between smaller countries and so on, and they back the UN to go and get involved and stop it when it looks incipient, then it can work. The difficulty comes when the sort of the big boys are at play, because then the UN can't. But there is one thing which I don't know whether it was tried or not. Remember, this is like the chronicle of a war foretold. The Americans have been screaming from the rooftops for the last 7 or 8 weeks that this war was going to happen. The Russians are building up an invasion force and so on. I wonder if the Secretary General thought of trying to send off an envoy to Moscow and to Kiev and perhaps also to Washington to say, listen, what's it going to take to prevent this war? If you're building up these forces because you are afraid that Ukraine is going to join NATO, can we, the UN, come in the way and try and obtain the guarantees that Ukraine will not be admitted to NATO and get NATO to talk about that, get Ukraine to talk? I don't know if this was tried. But if it was tried...
we would have heard about it, I'm guessing.
We'd probably have heard about it if it had succeeded. But if it wasn't tried, then that is a bit of a pity. Because the one thing the UN has is this moral authority of being the only world body. And it would have been good if the Secretary General had thought of trying to get involved at that point. But sometimes it's possible that both the Americans and the Russians said, hands off, we're dealing with this. We're the big boys, we'll handle it. You stay out, UN. If that was their attitude, well, now we're living with the consequences.
So give us your sense of Vladimir Putin, because, is this testosterone? Is this an autocrat really at the end of his reign?
The autumn of the patriarch, as Mike has said. I met Putin when he was a much younger man. In fact, in his first year as president, he came to the...
A spy? No, not then.
He had been a spy earlier. He'd been a KGB agent, I'm told, of some distinction, but middle level. But had risen very fast. And then Yeltsin, who was a bit fond of his alcohol and was really getting quite decrepit towards the end, appointed Putin as prime minister. He then found himself in a position to succeed when Yeltsin finally had to step aside. And he came to the UN, which is where I met him when I was accompanying Kofi Annan, and he was meeting with Kofi Annan. And I found, for a somewhat slight figure, he's not a very tall man, 5'6" or something, or 5'5", slim, thin, and very restless. I remember him shaking his foot like this all the time throughout the meeting. It was a very strange sort of, you don't expect a head of state. They're all sort of people of great dignity and gravitas. Here's this guy constantly going up and down with his feet. I remember thinking that that was quite a curious business. Subsequently, I moved on from the Secretary General's office, head of my own department. I didn't have that many opportunities to meet the gentleman face to face, but clearly he grew enormously in stature and power in the course of the 20 years that have followed. He's been president or prime minister briefly, but basically president for 20 years. And in those circumstances, the amount of power he's amassed within Russia have made him unchallengeable within his own country, but have also possibly prevented him from fully appreciating how the rest of the world sees him in his country. Because this has been a public relations disaster for Russia. I mean, it was only June last year that both Putin and Biden had met in Geneva, and there was talk of the Americans and the Russians rediscovering each other cordially. The Americans were all focused on China and on the Indo-Pacific, and the Quad was the big thing. Exactly. And now my worry is the Americans will completely forget the Indo-Pacific, take their eye off the Quad, and focus once again on Europe, thanks to the Russian misadventure. And I'm not entirely sure what Mr. Putin's strategic objectives are. Where does he want this war to go? What does he want to achieve? Is he trying to get regime change in Ukraine and knock off the president, put somebody who's a puppet there? Is he trying to capture territory in the eastern half of the country? What exactly does he want to do? And how will he achieve what he wants to achieve by military means alone? As it is, the Russian troops are not making very rapid headway. Various people were confidently predicting that the capital city would fall within 2 days. Well, it's been 4 days and it hasn't fallen. Indeed, some smaller towns haven't fallen. A lot of people don't like the idea of a foreign army, even if it's a brotherly foreign army, marching in and taking over their country. And so there's a lot of resistance.
Do you want to do any crystal ball gazing, or should we go to India's role? Because that's what's pertinent to us, starting with Operation Ganga. We have great names for all these things we do, the evacuation of all our students there. And latest news today, I don't know if you know about it, but 4 ministers are going to 4 neighboring states of Ukraine to help the process.
I think that's most unfortunate, actually. I must say that the priority ought to be evacuating people, not dancing attendance upon ministers. We need more boots on the ground, or field worker level guys or girls who will go there and actually be at the border crossings and help. Because I don't know how many of you have been watching social media and seeing videos coming out of Indian students in desperation at borders. It's scary. Some of them are being beaten up by border guards. Some of them are being attacked by Ukrainians saying, your country stood with the Russians, why should we help you? Some others are saying they have no food, no money, no place to sleep, no place to...
And it's all bitterly cold.
It's also bitterly cold, as Europe is at this time of year. It's pretty awful. And rather than sending ministers, he should have, for the price of a minister, you can send 10 ordinary young people from the government.
So why do you think the government is sending the ministers? Is it optics? Is it that there's a serious situation there and they're worried about the 15,000 odd people who are still there?
I don't know if any other country outside Europe has 20,000 citizens stuck in Ukraine in the middle of a raging war. It's a very serious responsibility. We were slow off the mark, there's no question about it. The government had evacuated precisely 242 people in one Air India flight, one flight, before the war broke out. And those 242 people were made to pay through their noses for the tickets, which is really quite shameful when you think of how previous governments have evacuated people in crises. We evacuated people from Kuwait when the Iraqi invasion happened. We evacuated people from Libya when the war there happened, from Yemen. And the government of India, no previous non-BJP government of India ever charged a paise to the Indian citizens who were being brought out of harm's way. Nor were there any grand celebrations and ministers walking down crowded aircraft to essentially solicit applause for the Prime Minister. I mean, all that is most unfortunate, I think. The government should understand this is their basic duty. They should do it. And they should do it without looking for applause at this point. Let them first solve the problem, get 20,000 people back home.
But they would say that that's why they're sending the ministers, and all the Operation Ganga flights are now completely borne. I mean, the Foreign Secretary has made a point.
Now they're going to pay for it.
It's going to be at government expense. So,
sending the ministers.
Should we be faulting the government? I mean, this government, should we be faulting it? Because that seems to be the problem, right? You cannot fault this government ever.
Is that healthy or right in a democracy?
No, I'm not saying if it's healthy or right. I'm asking you, can we fault this government? Because that seems to be what you cannot do these days.
Look, it's very easy for the government, every time they criticize, to say, oh, you're politicizing this, you're bringing politics into this is cheap, etc. Or to turn around and say, but what do you think Nehru would have done? Blaming Nehru is their default option. But having said that, honestly, I'm not sure that the ministers are the people, unless the ministers have specific experience in managing evacuations. And I don't think there are too many ministers with that kind of background. I don't know which the 4 ministers are, perhaps the former general.
Hardeep Puri, VK Singh, Kiran Rijiju, and there was a 4th minister, Mr. Jyotiraditya Scindia.
All right, well, let's see how they do. And, as long as they don't expect people to leave the border to look after them, and rather they will go to the border and look after the Indian citizens, then I'm happy.
Okay, let's talk about. This is the sense of the ridiculous that's there in any situation. But we really hope they all come back. How many of lots of people from Kerala?
2,300.
How many of them are back? I'm sure you have a sense.
No, we don't have too many coming back yet. A handful. I mean, there have only been a couple of flights that have come since this started. But the thing is, I, as an MP, have been inundated with letters and messages. I can't tell you how many. I mean, because almost everybody has been able to contact their relatives. Communications are still functioning normally. So messages, videos, WhatsApps have all been coming. And of course, people are reaching out in large numbers. All I can do is forward these requests to the MEA. And today I spoke to the Speaker of Parliament, and he said, send me the messages as well. I will intervene, which may help because he is from the ruling party. And being the Speaker, he will have some clout. So we're trying to do everything we can. But there are some practical problems as well. First of all, there are Indians who've reached the border areas, but are being blocked there,
Yeah.
either by guards from the Ukrainian side or from the other side. There are people who are not able to reach the border areas because they're in interior towns and they have no transport. What are we doing about that? Can we get some people in? And can we get the Ukrainian authorities to cooperate with us when we have not been helpful to the Ukrainians? We have essentially implicitly sided with the aggressor, or at least not condemned the aggressor. Will the Ukrainians go out to be helpful to us in moving people from the interior towns? There are people sitting in basements in the capital, Kyiv, which you've seen videos of. Many people are running out of food, water. They don't have money. They basically paid their college fees and were expecting to live in the college hostels. It's a tough time, and there are many, many people who are essentially in areas under bombardment. This is not their war, and they have every right to be brought back to their home country.
And your sense as of today, which is about 4 or 5 days into the war, that things will get much worse before it can get better?
It need not be. I mean, to be honest, the simplest solution for all of us would have been a swift and decisive Russian victory. If, as people had said, they marched into the capital in 2 days, as many expected, then perhaps the humanitarian crisis could also have been contained. But the longer this war is prolonged, the more the crisis will be for the people there, and it's also the more the crisis will be for the world economy. Oil prices shooting up, gas prices and supplies interrupted, stock markets deeply affected, trade sinking. I think there's some real consequences in the real world for people everywhere else, including in India. Our budget projections are going to go for a toss in the short term. So it's not looking good. Will it get worse? I don't know, because as I said, no one really knows what the strategic objectives are that Mr. Putin has in mind. If he's told the troops, you're going to go on and capture Kyiv and make sure this president is in manacles or whatever, then I think that's going to take a while to achieve, judging by the news reports. But if the Russians suddenly accelerate their progress and finish it off, it could be sooner, or if the Russians change their mind. You know, in 1962, when the Chinese marched into our country, we were unprepared for their invasion, but we were equally unprepared for them to suddenly say, okay, we've done enough. They stopped, declared a unilateral ceasefire, and withdrew. And we were all completely taken aback. So if it's a quote-unquote, we'll teach them a lesson kind of exercise, the Russians could do that too. We don't know.
Right. Let's talk about India's abstention, because for anybody watching it without being an expert...
By the way, all of this is not in the book, huh? So don't worry. This is all Anuradha being a journalist.
You don't want me to ask these questions?
Yeah, go ahead.
So, no, but the thing is that, we are not experts, but when you think about it and you see what's happening there, you don't want India to have sided with Russia by using the abstention. But on the other hand, we know, and you've written about it, I think in your Matrubhumi column, about the strategic and long historic relationship India has with Russia, our dependence on weapons, etc., etc. Can nations afford to be idealistic, empathetic, and morally correct, or is it really about geopolitics, strategy, and self-interest?
Anuradha, it's not just moral. The reason I objected to the Indian stand, and in particular the language that was used, when one country has clearly attacked another, to call upon both countries to de-escalate is the height of hypocrisy and weakness. I objected to all that because these are not just moral principles. These are actually principles in everyone's interest. What are these principles? Borders must be inviolate. State sovereignty must be respected. Disputes cannot be settled through the use of force. I mean, these are time-honored principles. They go back to Nehru's Panchsheel as far as Indian policy is concerned. And as far as India is concerned, we've actually upheld these principles for 75 years. Now, why is it that when Russia invades, suddenly these principles are quietly buried, and we talk about, essentially we show understanding. We don't use the word Russia, we don't use the word invasion, we don't talk about violation. We basically say de-escalation, peace, negotiations. I mean, it's not that the Ukrainians indicated any unwillingness to negotiate, but they're being hammered. So, I mean, I think that, honestly, we didn't cover ourselves with glory at that time. And as far as the vote is concerned, You can even abstain if you must, but first in your speech, explain that you hold these principles to be sacrosanct and that you deplore the fact that Russia has done it. But for whatever ABC reason, you're abstaining on the resolution, but on the substance, you're there. Here, you've not even shown solidarity with the victim in either of your statements, as well as, of course, not on your vote.
I come back to my question, about, you said it's not just about being on the right side in terms of, morality, but also about strategic reasons, because
Yeah,
China was
principles
supposed to be
help us
the world, was the enemy number one in the last few years, isn't it, where the world was concerned, and definitely a big problem for India, enemy number one. So you're saying that there will be consequences of this abstention, not just from the moral lens, but from the strategic lens?
That's right, because if we show that these principles don't matter to us, why should other countries have any sympathy for us when other people violate these principles? If China marches across our borders, if China violates our sovereignty, if China uses force to, let's take a chunk of Arunachal Pradesh that they want to take, where are we? We can turn around in a country like Ukraine can say, where were you? And many European countries can say, where were you when the world needed you? You didn't care for these principles. Why do you expect us now to support you on these principles? So I think that if you're standing up for certain principles in international affairs, these principles apply all the time in all circumstances to all countries. Otherwise, they're not principles.
When Israel was formed, India, the new nation of India, voted against the formation of Israel it voted against recognizing Israel in the...
voted against the formation. The UN actually passed a resolution to create the country of Israel out of what was the British Palestinian mandate at that time. And
we voted against.
We voted against. But when Israel was then created, because enough others voted for it, we then recognized it fairly quickly.
The point I was trying to get to was that decades later, India is great friends. We may even have spent on Pegasus and bought Pegasus from NSO. So there are no permanent friends and enemies, isn't it? When it comes to nations, what I'm trying to get to the heart at here is real politics.
Yeah.
And how essential is that to nations and the way they behave? And that's very different from individual morality.
Yes, I think that's fair to say that states are not moral the way in which individuals are, and I don't disagree with you on that. But at the same time, real politics justification has to be in its effectiveness. Real politics is real if it works. If you're just seen as cynical, or worse still, if you're seen as weak. If people say, oh, they can't antagonize the Russians because the Russians might pull the plug on supporting them for something else. At the end of the day, we are already facing a Russia that has been warming up to China and Pakistan, our two biggest adversaries. It's not that Russia is the old Soviet Union constantly vetoing anybody who wants to raise Kashmir in the Security Council. In fact, the last time, it was the Americans who helped prevent Kashmir being discussed in the Security Council. So I can take the point that, states can't afford morality the way individuals can, but I think states do require consistency as states. States require to have a set of principles that can be applied as states normally. I mean, why do we talk about things like sovereignty? Because if everyone accepts the principle of sovereignty, then everyone is secure. And you can just point to that principle if somebody encroaches on your sovereignty. Now, suddenly, the Ukrainians are pointing to that principle, and India is saying, oh, I don't know, de-escalate. You see my point?
Yeah. Would you have been able to do things differently, given that this is the way you see the situation? Were the Congress in power, and were you to have been the Minister for External Affairs, the External Affairs Minister?
Yeah, I mean, look, I know that if I were in government, I would have taken exactly the stand that I've described here. But would I be in a position to do so? I don't know. I mean, the fact is, it depends very much on circumstances that don't exist. What I will not deny is that the policy that is being pursued right now is very consistent with previous approaches of India. But then I ask, why do we even aspire to be a member state of the Security Council? Why do we want to be
A permanent member. That's the aspiration.
If we don't have the courage to take a decision and take a stand on any principle or any issue that come before the council. I mean, one of the comments being made is, this is not our war, we didn't start it, why do we have to take a stand on it? Well, in that case, don't pretend to be an international player. Don't say that we are tired of being a rule taker in international affairs, we'll be a rule maker. Don't say that we want to be a Vishwa Guru. You know, just say, no, we rather just focus on ourselves and be Atmanirbhar and stay away from places like the council.
Okay. Talking about the fact that your party is not in power, a former colleague is headed to Europe, a friend, I'm sure. How does it feel to be someone who's got the experience, got the capabilities, has got the electoral mandate, is in parliament not once, not twice, 3 times now, and to be not in an executive position? What does it feel like to be in opposition for so long? And looks like it's going to be much longer.
Oh dear, I don't know. I hope that last part is not true. No, it's
well, that depends.
There we are. We have some votes right there.
It depends on you and your party.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is that, it doesn't feel great because obviously, you know, I gave up a lot of things to come back to India and to Indian public life.
And into the hurly-burly of electoral politics.
That's right. It's not the Rajya Sabha and being nominated and coming in smoothly. It's struggling in the heat and dust of elections. So it's been tough. But I did it partially because, yes, I wanted to have an opportunity to influence the direction in which my country was moving, and partially also because I thought that I could make a useful contribution. Now, at the moment, the contribution that I'm making is more in the realm of public discourse. It's through speeches and writings and interviews. It's not through taking any decisions. I remember when I did my PhD but left immediately to join the UN, one of my professors said, so you prefer the world of decisions to the world of conclusions, which I thought was a very interesting way of looking at it because, you know, academicians are often dealing with the same issues as politicians, but they just come into conclusions about it, whereas politicians have to make decisions about it. And yes, I think that is far more interesting. Today, as an opposition member, I can come to conclusions. I speak annually on the budget in the Lok Sabha and tear a strip off the poor finance minister, or I write articles, or I give interviews, and I talk about some of the policies that I disagree with. But at the end of the day, the policies are made anyway. Yeah. And all I'm doing really is making a noise from the sidelines. So, yeah, I must say I would much prefer to be in government, but I'm not going to go to the ruling party, which I fundamentally disagree with, merely because I want a taste of power or of political office. That would be unworthy.
But Dr. Tharoor, like nations don't require to be moral, I don't think we require our politicians to be very ideologically pure anymore, you know. The standards are no longer what they used to be. So what I'm trying to say is that you're a career politician. If you decided that, hey, you know, I'm not making headway at Coca-Cola, let me go to Pepsi. Or it doesn't apply when it's the BJP.
It's not a career and it shouldn't be one. I think it's a cause. Politics should be a cause, not a career. And you should go into it because you really have a vision of what is good for your country, and you want to work through politics to be in a position to achieve that vision. And for me, one of the indispensable components of my vision of India is of celebrating its diversity and of accepting all components of our society as equal stakeholders in the Indian adventure. That is, unfortunately, the antithesis of what the BJP and its fellow travelers stand for. Today we are seeing an absolute travesty of Hinduism through the Hindutva movement, which is basically trying to put people into labels by circumstances they were born into, religion, caste, region, language, and telling them we define you that way. And if you're not like us, because we are defined differently, then you have no space in our dreams for India. And I think that's wrong. I think that's awful. I mean, I just actually was telling you as we were coming on that I'd launched Khalid Ansari's book, and Khalid said light, anecdotal, almost gossipy sort of memoir. But he has a couple of pages talking about the pain he feels as an Indian Muslim for the way in which people he thought were friends think about these matters and treat him and other Muslims and question their nationalism and their patriotism. I think it's really awful. So if you ask me, am I capable of switching parties? I would say not to a party that doesn't share the same sorts of beliefs. Because then why am I in politics? You know, if I'm just looking for a career, honestly, I should have done it much earlier, for one thing. But also, I should be in another profession. Politics is about how do we create a better India. That's what the whole purpose of politics is. And if you don't have a sense of what it takes, what is a good vision of India, then I think you shouldn't really be in politics. Now, I recognize that many don't share my view. But this is why I am, and I'm going to stick
Certainly, so many people from your party, Jyotiraditya Scindia, we just mentioned, RPN Singh, Jitendra Prasad, Ashwini Kumar. You know, I mean, the list is growing, and
no, we
I'm
don't know where
wondering what
Ashwini
makes
has
you...
gone. He may go to a like-minded party.
Fair enough.
And you know, people like Mamta Banerjee and Sharad Pawar and so on created other parties, but continue to uphold exactly the same principles and
So
values.
would you be open to a non-BJP party? Because I would imagine you'd be very valuable. A 3-time MP from Thiruvananthapuram. I'm sure the BJP has wooed you often enough. I mean, the Prime Minister appreciated your Swachh Bharat efforts in 2014. So they've had an eye on you for a while now.
I've told them very clearly that I'm not
available.
You know, the crunch comes with the question of religious bigotry. I'm actually a fairly proud Hindu. But I have been brought up as a Hindu who believes cardinally in the principle that all ways of worshipping the divine are equally valid. That there is no monopoly. In fact, the Shiva Mahimna Stotram, which Swami Vivekananda loved to quote, actually says that just as different rivers flow, some straight, some crooked, in different directions and end up in the same sea, so also all kinds of prayer, all kinds of worship, all religions end up in the same divine. And that, to my mind, is the essential idea of Hinduism. It's as Vivekananda said again, it's not just tolerance, it's acceptance. We accept you. So you tell me you believe you have the truth in your faith. I believe I have the truth in mine. I'll respect your truth, you respect my truth. And that, I think, is the best recipe for coexisting in our society. I actually grew up partly in Bombay.
I know.
I mean, from class 3 to beginning of class 9, I was here in school in Bombay. And my parents were, of course, from that generation that came of age, the nationalists, as independents don't. And they were of that generation that didn't believe in all this stuff. My father dropped his caste name in college. And when friends came home to play, never was their religion or caste identity mentioned to me by my parents. I was never made aware that somebody was different because they were a minority or something else. I mean, I remember, one was conscious that a particular friend, who was known to all as Mammu, was in a minority of the very rich. But I had no idea that Mammu was actually meant to be a different kind of minority because the Mammu was short for Muhammad. Now, I mean, and there were many, many other friends of many other religious faiths who came. And it's only years later that I realized that amongst the circle of friends who were constantly in and out of my house were, Sikhs, Hindus, Muslims, Parsis, Christians, even a Jew. And that was Bombay in those days, and that was the India that I grew up valuing. And I cannot, therefore, have any truck with a party that fundamentally challenges that essential strength of India. It is a strength, believe me, it's not a weakness.
Of course. What about the other parties that seem to be, at least, where the states are concerned, really being able to assert themselves electorally? The TMC, AAP even, the NCP you mentioned. Would you be open to overtures from these parties?
Look, at the moment, I want to see the Congress get its act together and succeed. I was one of those who signed that letter saying, let's diversify our party through broader-based institutions, revive some of the institutions, have more discussions. Not in any way to undermine the party, but actually to... okay, thanks, if you will. Not in order to undermine the party, but to strengthen it, because I really believe that it represents, in many ways, the best values that we'd all like to see in our country. And I'm still hopeful that if we can get the message across effectively, that the public will buy into it. I do believe that we may need to think seriously about participating in a broader front, in a broader coalition, because if you look at the numbers, the BJP won in 2014 with 31% of the vote, in 2019 with 37% of the vote. So even in their bigger victory, 63% of the electorate didn't vote for them. But they voted for 45 different parties. And so the opposition vote was fragmented and the BJP came through. Is it possible for us to create a formula under which the strongest opposition party is given a free hand in different areas, and that might be a regional party in some states and a national party like the Congress in other states, and we just have to see whether we can't actually put the BJP in its place. And I think that the mathematics suggest that this is a feasible formula. But again, I don't belong to the party high command, and the high command will have to decide. But I would like to see, because the Congress, I think, in many ways, is an institution that captures that diversity of India, that has a storied history.
Dr. Tharoor, high command. You had me at high command. We got it. Question is, how long are you going to be patient? How long are the other signatories on that letter going to remain patient? Because, you know, lots has been said about Rahul Gandhi. He's hard, I mean, and I'm, how shall I say, I see him as hardworking, he has a liberal outlook, he often is ahead of the curve. I mean, you know, his take on COVID and his anticipation of what was happening was pretty spot on. But he's, you know, for some reason, he clearly has a perception issue that he's battling against. And I think, you know, the quote that, I'm so sorry, but President Obama had about him in his book sort of sums up where Rahul Gandhi is going wrong. You know, this earnestness, but some of an intelligent student, but somehow he doesn't seem to, yeah, here, sorry, please bear with me. Yeah, on Rahul Gandhi, Obama says, and I quote, he has a nervous, unformed quality about him, as if he were a student who had done the coursework and was eager to impress the teacher, but deep down lacked either the aptitude or the passion to master the subject. Now, this sounds a bit harsh, but it
does sound a bit harsh.
It does sound a bit harsh, I admit, because I've already said what we see as good in Rahul Gandhi. But I don't think this perception is going to go away in a hurry. And I would imagine that the BJP is happy to have him around just to be able to have an object or a person to sort of ridicule and to poke fun at.
Yeah, so two things there. First of all, Obama's comment goes back to 2012. So even if it may have been one man's view at that time, I think it's fair to say that in the 10 years since, Rahul Gandhi has evolved considerably as a politician. But the second thing is that ultimately, why would we want to concede to the BJP's caricaturing, and it's been really a caricature of the man, that has painted him in the public perception in such a negative light. You know, I am perfectly prepared to say that in any democracy, the ultimate test is what the voter wants. But the voter should not allow themselves to be misled either. Because, you know, he's no fool, Rahul Gandhi, and he's portrayed by the BJP and their assiduous meme manufacturers as one. And I think that that's most unfair. Secondly, Rahul Gandhi actually represents a refreshing change to the style of leadership of Narendra Modi. Because when Narendra Modi is all about I, me, myself, I'm the big hero on the white stallion, cantering down with upraised sword, ready to cut through the Gordian knots of all your problems because I have all the answers. And we've seen over the last 8 years how well that hasn't worked out. Then isn't it better to have a guy who comes and says, listen, I'm not sure I know all the answers, but I want to listen to you. Tell me what your problems are, and I'll come with a whole bunch of experienced, qualified, capable people who'll work with you to find solutions to your problems and implement them. And I'll be there leading the way, and we won't give up on you. I mean, that's a very different style of leadership that I believe this country actually needs.
But does it want? That's the question. Because people in India seem to be quite appreciative of, in quotes, the strong man.
You know, the curious thing is, at what point does the strong man pass his shelf life, his use-by date? Because we're seeing this perhaps with Putin. We're seeing the declining popularity of Erdogan, where Istanbul fell to an opposition mayor. It is strong men can impress with their strength, but after a while, the public also looks at how their lives have been improved or not by the strong man. And if you go and ask people, have you done better in life because of Mr. Modi's government? How many people are going to raise their hands? Why would somebody who voted for Mr. Modi's party in 2014 because they thought he was going to give them a job, still vote for them? Thank you. Still vote for them when that's okay. When they still don't have a job. Unemployment is rife. I mean, literally every sector of the economy is down. People are suffering and hurting in many ways. Why do they need to be told that the government has some responsibility and that a different government might give them different results? That's the message we need to take to people. And at the same time, I think we also need to talk about the kind of India that they want to bring their children up in. An India divided by bigotry, hatred, communal violence, is that the kind of India that they'd like their kids to inherit? I think if we were to get the right message across, most people would see the merit of a different kind of approach to India.
How do you make this message reach people effectively? Because that seems to be your problem. When I say yours, I mean your party's problem. And how much longer is a person like you and people, of your experience and stature in the Congress party willing to keep the faith? Because it really seems that you're keeping the faith. I mean, look, we've seen Rahul Gandhi, he's the MP from Kerala now. We've seen him there very often. We don't see you with him. Are you valued in the, and I'm not trying to be troublemaker, but he's with the Congress party leader there and stuff, but you're the youth connect, you're the pan-India face. Malayalis love you. We know how clannish Malayalis can be. They're very proud of their own. So why are you not seen when Rahul Gandhi is in Kerala? I don't see you in those pictures.
I think you'll have to ask other people what they see and want and desire. I mean, I'm one of these guys who does his job, does it as well as he can. My job is to represent the people of Thiruvananthapuram and to deliver as many services as possible I can to them, address their problems, receive petitions and solve them. And then at the national level, it's to, I think, move the needle on the national conversation, which I'm proud to say I've done on a number of issues.
Sure.
I've done it through my interventions in Parliament and through politics, but I've also done it through my own writing, through my interviews, through conversations like this with you and others. I think that there are multiple ways in which one can contribute. I have not had much of an opportunity in different party forums, and I'll admit that because it's pretty evident to the likes of you. But I have been asked to initiate, create, and head the All India Professionals Congress, which is a platform available for people like you good folks who are professionally qualified, but who have a sort of sense of alienation from politics, as many of you do. I mean, I was a child of professional parents myself, and I could see my father and his friends working hard, paying their taxes, and in the evening over a drink bitching about the politicians and the politics and the policies. So we said, let's create a forum where you don't have to do that, where you can actually come in and reach out to politicians, and you'll be heard by politicians, and you can influence some of the policies that you believe need fixing. And that's been working quite well. It's a very small group within the Congress, but we have a presence in 28 states now, the All India Professionals Congress, and we've actually got people coming up with interesting, professionally minded approaches, solutions, and insights into problems, which have made it then to the attention of the Congress leadership. So there's something I'm doing that wasn't being done before.
Sure. So you don't want to put a timeline to how long you're going to keep the faith. When you keep the faith, you keep the faith?
That's right. When you keep the faith, you keep the faith. The day that...
You're quoting me back to me. Come on, Dr. Tharoor. You can do better than that.
Good line, good line.
Shall we take questions and then I'll come back to a few more to round it up? Because, I'm sure, we've covered a lot of ground. I can see a hand up there. Yes, sir. Do you need... Yes, sorry. One second. Just give me a second. We'll figure that out. Yeah, that...
Dr. Tharoor. Hi, a very good evening. My question is on the AIPC, which you rightly just mentioned about.
Right.
AIPC is a very good platform. Not many political parties have it, but there is no awareness. Now, I'm a professional. I want to be part of the AIPC.
Right.
And to be honest, first time I heard about it was when my friend, who works very closely with you, Rohit June, joined
Right.
the AIPC. But
Right.
I have absolutely no clue how to go about it apart from a website.
Yeah.
And there is no awareness, there's absolutely no mention about the work which the AIPC is doing. Why is it like that? And why is it that AIPC cannot perhaps take a forefront which will encourage people like me perhaps to join it?
I think you're absolutely right. I mean, my COO, my Chief Operating Officer, Alam Javeri, is standing right here. One of the things I've told him is we really need to revamp the website, first of all, to showcase better all that we're doing. And whenever people do a search for Professionals Congress on the net, they should immediately come to this site, have not just a way of signing in, but also to learn about the body. We've tried to do that, so it shouldn't be difficult for you to find profcongress.in on .com or .in? .com on the net. But once you've done that, we really would like you to, the model was kind of a Rotary Club model where people are organized in chapters. Because it's a political body, the chapters actually correspond to Lok Sabha constituencies. And we want it to be small enough that you all know each other and can interact with each other, and large enough that you can have a critical mass to come up with ideas. It's very much meant to be a platform for self-starters, so we're not going to tell you what to do. Rohit June is going to work on MSMEs for us and come up with ideas as to how we can have better policies to strengthen MSMEs and make them more effective. That kind of thing can be incredibly useful. I remember the Tamil Nadu AIPC did a study of the impact of demonetization and GST on the Tirupur garment industry. And we made a bit of a splash. We released it at a press conference in Madras. It sort of rocked the government at that time as something that the policies that weren't working and that had resulted in layoffs and unemployment and declining profits, that sort of thing. So the professional mindset can come in, but it can also involve you in various other kinds of slightly more conventional political activities as well. Everything from candlelight vigils to actually drawing up manifestos for the Congress Party, conducting consultations with the public, with the voters, with interest groups on specific topics and coming up with that. So I think partly why it's not been so visible in the last couple of years is COVID, which confined our activities overwhelmingly to the net and webinars and that sort of thing. But now that COVID seems to be easing up and we're all sitting around with our masks, let's hope that we can become more visible. And certainly we'd welcome you and others like you joining so that we can actually strengthen our activities. Maharashtra is one of our more active states. And since you're based in Bombay, we'd love to have you come on board.
Thank you.
Alim, slip him your card and we can see
We have
whether...
a question here.
Yeah, we've just done the manifesto of the Congress Party in the Uttarakhand elections was entirely created by AIPC. Yeah.
A question about the book?
No.
Whatever you like, go ahead.
This may be a vague question, nothing related to what you spoke about so far. But if you could just shed light, because of the uncertainty around what's happening right now, around the South China Sea, obviously we know nothing of what's really happening there, but given the uncertainty, is there something we should expect? Something that you think we should be prepared for? We've obviously all not been, we all say we have militaries that are ready for war, but they haven't been tested in 2 or 3 decades. So with the South China Sea, what are the risks? What should we be aware of, cognizant of?
Well, the South China Sea, the problem in one word is that the Chinese claim essentially dominance over the entire sea. They have something they call the 9-dash line, which they've drawn on the map of South China Sea, that essentially arrogates pretty much all the islands, all the land masses there to them, saying these are all extensions of our territory. That puts them in direct conflict with countries like Vietnam, the Philippines, and Japan even. And they do so with a certain amount of brazenness. Plus, with the resources that they have built up through the growth of their economy in the last 20 years, they've been able to do things like militarize hitherto uninhabited islands. So they'll put an outpost, plant a flag, maybe even build a runway, or at least a helicopter landing station, park a few Chinese soldiers there, and then they'll tell the Philippines, sorry, this is ours, and here's the proof, we're there. And the Philippines starts fulminating, but can't do anything about it, because China is the big bully on the block. Yeah. Now, that kind of thing has already been happening, without the excuse of the Russian example to follow. but it may well gather more momentum. Now, the big question in people's minds are, will China be emboldened to attack Taiwan? I still think not. I think they'll keep probing and irritating and so on, rather the way they've done with us on the line of actual control of the Himalayas. But I don't see the Chinese jeopardizing their present status in the world by actually embarking upon a folly like the Russians have done. Unlike Russia, China is very vulnerable to things like international sanctions and international estrangement. They're a very heavily export-dependent economy. Their growth is like 80% plus dependent on their exports, and they're being a big player in the international trading system. So I just think that it would have to take a really crazy guy in China to jeopardize all of that for the satisfaction of conquering Taiwan or whatever. And Taiwan will not be easy to conquer. They've got a pretty effective air force, pretty good surface-to-air missiles and air defenses. They're a substantial island state, and at best China could capture some of the smaller islands off the coast of Taiwan the Taiwanese have. But I don't see them just marching in and taking over the place that quickly. And since the Chinese know that, and they know that the longer it takes, the greater the international opprobrium and the greater the risk of sanctions and cutting off of trade links and so on, I think they'd be nuts to do it. But there's no discounting the role of the irrational in international affairs. The historian Barbara Tuchman, about 40 years ago, wrote a book called The March of Folly, where she argued that basically the significant factor in some of the biggest historical disasters and wars through the last 1,000 years was simply folly, foolish mistakes made by leaders. So let's hope that there is, not too much foolishness running rampant in Beijing for the next little while.
Thank you.
Another question?
Hand right in front.
Yeah. Here. Okay, all right, and then we'll come here.
We should get some ladies also raising their hands, I hope. Huh? Yeah.
Good evening, Dr. Tharoor sir.
Good evening, sir.
I was in the army as a colonel, served for 30 years. I have no affiliation to any politics, but I just wanted to know the future of the oldest party, which my family used to love.
Well, I think there are many possible futures, and it all depends on what the party does, especially in the next few years and leading up to the 24 elections. One future is to regain its past glory, and not just to regain it, but to also perhaps embrace back into its fold many of those who've left. I mean, the Mamata Banerjees and Jagan Reddys and Sharad Pawars, who are ideologically not different from the Congress, but who for various different reasons left. If we can get into a common platform, same sheltering umbrella of the Congress, instead of being a big tent party, we could lead a big tent coalition and perhaps get everyone in and really become again a very strong force and a viable alternative to the BJP. But there is also certainly the possibility of the opposite happening, and I think we'll have to show through our competence, our drive, our hard work in elections, and our articulation that we actually stand for the things that India really believes in, that most Indians would like to see enshrined in office. That's my honest belief, and I'm going to do my very best to see whether we can contribute to that.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
There's a lady at the back.
Great.
If you had to give advice to Zelensky at this moment, as he goes to the border of Belarus to negotiate.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
Yeah,
Advice
sure.
to whom, sorry?
To the Ukrainian president.
To the Ukrainian president. If you had, as he goes to the border of Belarus to negotiate, what would be 3 points that you may...
Well, I mean, I think honestly, I can understand his reluctance to negotiate with Russian troops marching over his soil. The time for offering a negotiation would be over. I mean, we ourselves say with regard to terrorism, we're willing to talk, but we won't talk with a gun pointed to our head. We've said this about the Kashmiri militancy. Kashmiri political rights are important, and we must make concessions, but we make concessions after you put your guns down. We're not going to talk to you when you're pointing a gun at me. So I think that the Ukrainian president would be very reluctant to offer negotiations from what looks like a position of weakness. But if, again, the UN or some other intermediary can come in and try and work out such an approach, I think what the Ukrainian president would ask is what I think ideally the UN should have asked, which is, what will it take for you to stop this madness? I mean, what do you want out of us? Now, if the Russian president says, I want your head on a platter, he's not going to give it, right? If the Russian president says, I want you to resign and to have a government of my choice installed in your country, that too is unlikely to be acceptable. But if he says, I want you to withdraw your application to enter NATO, or I want a signed and sealed guarantee that there'll be no foreign missiles parked within, basically 5 minutes of Moscow is what it will take for a missile to come from Ukrainian soil. If there are sort of realizable demands like that, then I think a negotiation may be possible. As I said, the problem is none of us really knows what are Russia's real strategic objectives in this conflict. And we'll only know when they declare victory and stop. Will that victory come only when they're in command of the capital, or will it come when they feel they've taught a lesson and they're willing to march back tomorrow? I don't know. But until that's clear, I think President Zelensky, is going to be unlikely to seem to be offering negotiations, because it will look suspiciously like capitulation, like a loss of nerve. And especially when we don't know what exactly Putin wants. But, this is something where the UN or a well-meaning mediator country could perhaps try and go to both capitals and say, what do you want? Tell us what you want. No one seems to know that.
Anuradha, may I? Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Since we were talking about women, I just thought, since I happen to be a woman, may I?
Please.
Okay. I have two questions intertwined. There are two names, Prashant Kishore and Priyanka Gandhi. There's a lot of curiosity around both. There's not enough information about both. I'm just very curious to know, what do you feel is Prashant Kishore's relationship with currently with the Congress, and what might happen in the future, and what is Priyanka Gandhi's real role in the Congress, and what might we expect from her? I know I'm asking two questions, but since you... Thank you.
Well, I'd say that as far as Prashant Kishore is concerned, I think that he can speak perfectly for himself. He's been giving an awful lot of interviews. And he said that he has been in extensive talks with the Congress party, which broke down, that he was quite willing. And I know that in my conversations with him, he has said that the Congress represents the best vehicle for opposition unity and for offering a meaningful alternative to the ruling party in this country. But clearly the Congress party was not able to come to terms with him as to how he would help the Congress party to achieve that. So he has been exploring other options. As you know, he's been a close advisor to the Trinamool Congress President Mamata Banerjee. We understand from yesterday he's been running around Telangana, working with the TRS party. So he is a freelance operative, and he has a tremendous reach and has a good track record of success. And clearly at the moment it seems he has committed himself to forces that are opposed to the BJP, and therefore we should expect him to be a catalyst of some sort of opposition formula, alliance, coalition, whatever, that will come up in 24 to face the BJP. As for Priyanka Gandhi, she's been in charge of the UP, of the state of UP for the last couple of years, and she has been leading our campaign effort. I thought that her idea of making it a woman-centric campaign was actually an inspired one. I mean, "Ladki hoon, lad sakti hoon" is one message that resonates and continues to resonate. But beyond that is the idea that if you focus on gender, you're cutting across everybody else's identity politics, because it's transcending caste, religion, region, language. Gender applies to people of all castes, all religions, all languages, and gender rights and women's rights, I thought, were a very, very good concept. She even made sure that 40% of our tickets were given to women candidates in UP. Now, that's been quite impressive. And there's one thing about Priyanka Gandhi that I think is pure sort of media gold, is that she manages to both come across as thoughtful and reflective, and at the same time speak in very simple and accessible terms, whether it's English or Hindi. I mean, some of us perhaps are thoughtful and reflective, but are accused of speaking above people's heads. And some of us speak very simply, but are accused of being foolish.
Hindi seems to be a very good, powerful weapon in her hands. I mean, the language Hindi.
If I can use a Hindi word, she's very tikha. Like there's, she's got that
Namak.
namak. She's got that
quick repartee,
She
one
is,
line,
and
and
she's
gets
very
it, yeah.
impressive. So I think she has a tremendous future. She has been campaigning a bit outside UP now.
Yeah.
She's campaigning in
Punjab.
Uttarakhand. She did a
So why
virtual
this shyness
campaign
to just, officially declare a role for her, which is, I don't know, Anuradha, I mean, you probably know more, but why this shying away
the
from...
my Delhi journalist friends say that the next Lok Sabha election is when she's going to contest, because she didn't
Could
do
be,
UP.
especially
She's not
if
doing
her,
UP.
if her mother
yeah.
doesn't want to run again.
Yeah.
That's certainly a possibility, but one can't
I mean, you
speak
should
for
have
her.
some Gandhi from UP, right?
We might have two. Let's see. But I don't know. I mean, I think they'll have to speak for themselves. But she certainly, I think her image is in good shape, as we can see from the questioner.
No, sure. Yeah, you had a question, sir. Mike.
Thanks a lot. Great speech so far.
Thank you.
So, in the US, Dr. Tharoor, Trump was heavily opposed by, or at least it was held back by the courts. He was opposed by the media. He was opposed by a lot of the businessmen who didn't support him. And finally, he was opposed by... Sorry, so I'll just repeat
Much
that.
better, yes, please.
Yeah. So in the US, Trump, when he was doing what he was doing, was held back by the courts. He wasn't supported by the businessmen. He wasn't supported by the media. And he finally wasn't supported by the electorate, and he lost the election. Right? Trump, right? In India, we have, the right wing doing what it is, but it seems to be supported by the courts. It certainly seems to be supported by the businessmen, and it is winning elections, right? So now you said you are a person, and you are a person who works in the heat and dust of the country. We are people who, exist in AC rooms. What is your view from the ground? Is the India that we all believe should be an India actually a different India on the ground? I mean, see, at the end of the day, the Congress Party was founded based on a lot of Western ideals, right? Democracy itself is a Western notion. These guys who formed the
Dr.
party...
Ambedkar would disagree with you there, but still, go ahead.
But I mean, it came from Greece and,
Now, he'll tell you we had the Buddhist Sanghas well before the Greeks had democracy.
But they formalized it, right? And it sort of got inspired from there. These guys went to colleges over there. They learned that. And we brought this idea to our country. We were fairly anglicized, right? We came with a colonial hangover, spoke English, idealized that. And now we are turning into a more desi country. So what is your view on the ground? What is this country actually about?
Now, it's a fascinating question because here I am as somebody who's written so many books about India, and very often, especially my earlier books, explaining India to the West and to the world, that I have to ask myself whether I got it all wrong. The heat and dust that I'm working in is in South India, and certainly the kind of divisive, bigoted message that you calling Desi doesn't exist or is not popular, is not credible in a place like Kerala or a place like Tamil Nadu. But it is gaining ground across the north, and one wonders, history is replete with examples of the coexistence of both communities. I mean, it's startling to realize that you can't have the Ram Leela in Banaras without the Muslim artisans who make the mosques. It's amazing to see example after example, story after story of the interpenetration of unifying themes between the two faiths. And yet, in that same northern India of the Ganga Jamni Tehzeeb, you are seeing a division of communities, blatant polarization, all this talk of Kabristan and Smashangarh. You're seeing everything that was inconceivable. I mean, I hear from political platforms sentiments expressed and ideas given voice to that when I was growing up in Bombay would have been impolite to express even behind the closed doors of your living room. So, did we get it wrong then? Or are they getting it wrong now? I personally prefer the latter explanation. That, there are people, politicians, who have decided that this is a good mother lode to mine, that it's electoral goal for them to stoke hatred and resentment and animosity. But the problem with that is it deeply damages the country. It introduces a toxic poison into our society. It alienates a significant section of our population, which then feels distanced from the triumphs and achievements that we want them to be a part of. They may actually start desiring to undermine those triumphs and achievements. You are actually causing immense long-term damage to India with this set of policies. And yet they're doing it for short-term political gain. That's what deeply worries me. So either I'm right and that's the explanation, or maybe our, as you say, our secularism or liberalism or whatever we call it, was a thin Western veneer that has inevitably worn off with time, and that the real civilization underneath is actually bigoted and communally divided and hostile and celebrates its own ignorance. I prefer not to believe that. I have a higher opinion of India and Indians than that explanation.
Do you feel that way in the last 2-3 weeks when we've seen this really traumatizing way in which the hijab story is playing out in Karnataka? We still don't have a ruling on it.
The hijab controversy is utterly bizarre because, again, I grew up in Bombay and Calcutta seeing all sorts of attire around me on the streets. You know, I happened to have been born abroad and I grew up here, but I went abroad again to go to graduate school. I was 19 years old. And one of the first things that struck me, the culture shock when I got to a Western country, was the uniformity of clothes on the streets. I couldn't believe that all the men were wearing shirts and pants and all the women were wearing skirts. And I thought, my gosh, what's this? This is the mid-70s when, you know, women weren't wearing pants. So, I mean, I had come from an India where you'd see saris and salwar kameezes and pantsuits and hijabs and burqas and multiple variations on the street around you, and you just learn to live with that as a fact of life. That kind of diversity was part of what we enjoyed about India. And suddenly you go to, you realize what uniformity can do. Now, to my mind, coming and seeing this in India, or this being promoted in India, shocks me. Secondly, it's a deeply troubling infringement of the rights of these young women to wear what they want or what they feel is in their interest to wear. I'm not one of those who argues it's essential test of Muslim faith, because I know many Muslim women who don't cover their heads, and I feel that we shouldn't infringe on their right not to cover their heads. But if somebody feels for her family or her community or just for herself that she wants to cover her head, it's not our business. I think she has every right to do that. Thirdly, the thing that I don't understand is, why is it that our so-called right-wing, in other countries right-wing means conservative, but here our right-wing means intrusive. Why is it that they need to tell people what they can and cannot wear, what they can and cannot eat, whom they can and cannot love? Why is it their business? You know, I'm a vegetarian in a non-vegetarian family. And that applies both to my parents' family and my sisters, and to my own kids and the home I had with their mother. And yet, to me, that was perfectly natural. I found it a perfectly valid proposition that there's nothing more intimate than deciding what I put into my mouth, and I wasn't going to bite into a corpse. But if they, for whatever reason, wished to do that, they were most welcome to do that, because it wasn't my business. And that's the question I ask these people objecting to the hijab. If another woman wants to put a piece of cloth on her head, how does it bother you? How does it affect you? Does it infringe on your rights? Does it make you, is it forcing you to do something different because she's got a head? Obviously not. So I want to get the government and I want to get the BJP and its ilk out of the bedroom, out of the kitchen, out of the dining room, and out of the tailor's shop.
Well said, Dr. Tharoor. Any more questions? Okay, would you like to take more questions? Sorry, but you've had a long day.
I have had a long day and I'm horrendously late for a dinner.
Okay.
But maybe one last question since you asked.
All right.
Thank you so much for taking this. I just want to know, with all the FTAs India is signing with all the different governments all around the world, all the different countries all around the world, and we project ourselves to be the factory of the world, like what China did about a couple years back, but is that the right transaction, like the right way we are going through? I mean, is it the right thing that we are doing?
No, I personally think it's the wrong thing. And not that FTAs are wrong. I'm all for FTAs, but I think what we should be plugging away is our strength at providing services and people, but not manufacturing. First of all, we don't have what it takes to compete initially with China and then with smaller countries like Vietnam, Laos, Malaysia, and so on, because they actually pay less than we do. They grant their workers less rights than we do. They have better infrastructure than we do. The ability to get manufactured goods out, to get from factory to port is very much better in any of those countries than from us. Streamlined functioning of ports and so on is much better in those countries. And they'll be racing circles around us. I mean, we are, unless we can radically transform all of these various elements, I'm afraid we are looking at a real loss. Look, I live in Lutyens Delhi, or Lutyens Delhi as the BJP likes to call it, the VIP area where Sarkari bungalows are for MPs. I have not known a single day without a power cut. We can't even manage 24/7 electricity in the nation's capital in a VIP enclave. What are we talking about? You know, every time that I talk to foreign importers about Indian goods, they love some of our goods, particularly our clothing, our designs, our jewelry, and so on. But they often tell me that production schedules and meeting export deadlines, India is hopeless at. And for many, many people in the West, those are the kinds of things that really matter. So I'm not sure how well we can compete on the manufacturing front, let alone produce goods that we are then in a position to export competitively. That's what the Make in India concept was supposed to be all about. So I would say, let's plug away at services. Let's try and create systems and agreements that enable our people to use their brain power and their skills and their training to be able to provide services to the rest of the world. That might be an area where we can gain far more rapidly.
Would there be a little shift, or a sliver of opportunity because of the kind of global disruption in supply chains that we saw, and therefore people reorienting around the world away from China? Wouldn't that be maybe an opportunity to sort of
That was the opportunity, but what was striking was there was a study that I read in 21, at the beginning of 21, about what happened in 20. I think there was something like 132 major companies pulled out of China because of COVID and the experience of Chinese lying about the origins of the virus and all that stuff. Many of these were Japanese companies, by the way. Of the 132, only 5 even discussed the possibility of relocating to India. Most of them went off either to places like Vietnam, Philippines, Indonesia, Malaysia, or returned to their home countries like Japan and so on, with suitable incentives from the Japanese government. So India was not seen as a preferred destination. We haven't been able to make ourselves.
in spite of the PLI schemes that were announced and...
In spite of all that. So, I'd love to be proven wrong. Believe me, I'd love it if the government actually succeeded in attracting serious amounts of manufacturing here. And I've never been ashamed to say I was wrong, but so far I haven't had too many opportunities to.
Well, we've got to close, right? We've got to let him go.
I think that was a great
I don't
way
think
to
anyone wants to let you go.
wrap up the conversation.
You're very sweet, but I really should wrap up. I have a feeling my dinner host, who was expecting me at 8:30, half an hour away, is in despair.
You can do a Zoom call.
Can't eat via Zoom, though.
That's true. No, Dr. Tharoor, thank you very much. There's a lot in this book, obviously, that we haven't gone to. It's also very deeply personal. I don't want to get into it, but do pick it up. You've gone through a lot.
Yeah, there are autobiographical elements also in one of the sections.
So it's interesting, the range, and listening to Dr. Tharoor today, you know why we should have guys like this in government, because there's knowledge, there's experience, and there's also the ability to have a good laugh, which we really don't seem to see a lot of. And Dr. Tharoor, we miss you on that side of the aisle. Maybe soon, inshallah.
Inshallah. Indeed.
Inshallah. Keep the faith.
If the Hindutva movement will let us say that. But anyway, thank you so much, Anuradha. Enjoyed your questions. Thank you all. It's been a great audience.